Welcome to part 4 of the Mystical Meaning of Hair Covering series. We have got a lot to do today and time is short. What I'd like to be doing is to take you through the beautiful stories of Tanakh, to look at what's going on deeply in some of those situations and see the principles that we have learned together displayed there. Then I'd like to, as always, bring it back to ourselves and see what this means for us. So just a quick review. If you haven't listened to the first part, you can go and fill in a lot of the details. But in order to understand what the spiritual significance is of this mitzvah of a woman, married woman covering her hair, we need to understand what the feminine archetype represents in general. And we discussed that femininity, in a nutshell, is the ability to receive, to contain, to channel, and to manifest. Very beautiful and key to Hashem's intention of the world as He shares His Torah, His light, His blessing with us. The more we can receive, contain, channel, and manifest that, this describes the success of His mission of creating the world in the first place. So beautiful gifts, these feminine gifts, although they carry with them high stakes, as we will see today. Now, we took it one step further and we looked at hair itself, and we realized that hair itself represents this concept in a way, in that they are channels for creative expression, for spiritual expression, for potential, for birth in the world. This can be on an intellectual level, which is why it surrounds the head. It can be in the realm of action, base of the arm, and it is the expression of the deepest potential for the creation of new generations and children in the world. So it's powerful energy, which means that it can go very right and it can go very wrong. So if I would just summarize what we've been talking about, and we'll see this theme reiterated many times today, it is the seyar, the hair, can either, when the woman is in rightness and in relationship and truly in her strength, the seyar becomes shar, the hair becomes the gateway, the channel through which the most incredible blessing, infinite blessing and beauty enters her home, her marriage, the Jewish people and the world. When that ability to receive and contain is misplaced, she is not focused, she doesn't have the goal clearly set, doesn't understand this, so then there's a lot of diffusion, there's a lot of confusion of where she receives energy from and where she puts it, and it really creates chaos, it creates din in a bad way, in a difficult way. It necessitates Hashem's judgments to bring her back to alignment. And remember that the woman represents entire Jewish people. So this all runs very deep, but maybe let's leave these Kabbalistic descriptions aside. Bear with me if you're not fully with me. Let's take a look at Tanakh and let it speak for itself. And it's going to teach it to us in an incredibly tangible way, because it's the stories and what happened there as it was taught to us. So I'm going to speak about Iyov. We'll see what the relevance of Iyov is. I'm going to speak about Shimshon, who was the Nazir, the Nazirite that comes to mind, the one who never cut his hair. We have to see what's happening over there. We're going to take a look at Avshalom, who was a Nazir, but the story went very wrong. He doesn't have the same, even though Shimshon's life ended in catastrophe and there was a fatal mistake in that story, he is a tremendous tzaddik, whereas Avshalom was infamous. compared to Shimshon. We're going to take a look at both of those Nazirs. We're going to look at Esav, who, when he was born, was covered with hair. In fact, that's why he got the name Esav, which means he's complete, he's fully grown, he's matured because he has hair. It's a symbol of maturity. We're going to trace Esav's essence to his father Yitzchak and see how Yitzchak was the personification of all of what we're talking about on the positive. Bear with me. And finally, we're going to conclude our discussion today with looking at how the Jewish people, when they sinned in the Chet HaEgel, and when they made the golden image of the calf, Moshe comes down and he compares them to a woman who has uncovered her hair. I don't know if you've ever seen that source before, but it's a beautiful way to conclude the series as you see it all coming together. So let's start with Eov. The story of Eov is not well known. It's a little bit in the shadows in Tanakh. It doesn't enjoy the same popularity as, say, Esther. It's a hard story to relate to. I would say it's teaching us about Hashem's attribute of din, of justice. And there's a lot of allusions in what happened to Eov. And the commentators talk about, did it really happen? Is it just a story to teach us something? But basically what happened with Eov is that he lived very early on in history. Some say he was one of the advisors to Paro in Mitzrayim. So this was really, really early on, and it was Rosh Hashanah, and Hashem was speaking with his heavenly tribunal, spiritual forces in Shemayim, coming to judgment and decision of what should take place in the lives of his people. And he asks the Satan what he thinks about Eov, and he says to him, "Vayomar Shema LaSatan Hasamta libcha al avdi Eov." Have you paid attention to my servant Eov? I'm so proud of him. I'm reading in between the lines. Ki ein kamahu ba'aretz. There is none like him in all the land. Ish tam. He has perfection, simplicity. I don't know how you would translate that. He walks justly with me. Yashar, he is straight. Yirei Elokim, he fears God. V'sar me'ra, and he turns away from all evil. And the Satan says to Hashem, I'm not that impressed, because look at his life. He's living the life. He's got wealth. He's got a good name, social standing. He's got beautiful children. He's in good health. Of course, he's having a good time and a good relationship with you. He has no reason why not to. But what if you would challenge him? What if you would put him through an ordeal? Then let's see what happens with your gem, Eov. And that is how the story begins. Very hard to understand. We can take a look at it. You can take a look at it another time. But the Gemara, from this discussion, it's just amazing how Se'ar and So'ar and Sha'ar all come together in this Gemara, because the Gemara says that Eov said, Hashem, you crushed me, the Sa'ara, in a storm, and you've made my wounds and inflictions abundant for nothing. Says the Gemara that he criticized Hashem from a storm, and Hashem answered him from a storm, because way at the end of the whole book of Eov, it says that Hashem answered him from the storm, saying. So how did he criticize Hashem from a storm? It says, Ribono shel olam, shema ruach sa'ara avra lefanecha. Maybe there was a chaotic wind that passed before you and got you famished, discombobulated you. What chutzpah he's saying to him. Maybe you switched Eov with Oyev, and you think I'm your enemy, and that's why you are treating me so unfairly and unjustly. Hashem says to him, you're asking me from a storm? I'll answer you from a storm. And now there's a play on the word so'ar, storm, to say our hair. And he says, Harbe nimin barasi ba'adam, I've created numerous, uncountable hairs in a person. V'chol nima v'nima barasi laguma b'fnei atzman. Each hair, I've created its own bed, its own source of nourishment, its own follicle. Shalo yeheshtaim yonkos miguma achas, that two shouldn't be nourished from a single follicle. She'ilmale shtaim yonkos miguma achas, because if two were to be nourished from a single follicle, machshichos me'or einav shal adam, it would dim the light in a person's eyes. Ben guma luguma lo nischalefli, between a follicle and a follicle on your head of hairs that you can't even count. Ben Eov le'Eov nischalefli, I got confused between you and another guy, or you and an enemy. Hashem's answering him that everything I do, even through the Satan, is with incredible precision, with calculation, ultimately for the best, even though we don't understand at the time. And in this way, the discussion panned out. The sources go on, and it says, we learn from Eov, verse in Tehillim, it says, B'svivav nis'ara ma'od, in his close surrounds, the closer proximity you get to Hashem, it is more stormy. What does that mean? The Gemara, the sages explain, She HaKadosh Baruch Hu medakdek im tzadikim kachut hasara. Hashem is so particular with his righteous, like the breadth of a hair. So we understand that this concept of hair, as we mentioned, it's called dinim because it's channels of creative potential, creative expression, as we explained. But we're seeing how it's like a symbol of Hashem's precision and judgment, that attribute that he uses in his world to keep his world balanced. And we know that it is personified by Yitzchak. We are now in the Omer, and there's 7 weeks from Pesach till Shavuos. Each week corresponds to a different midah and a different one of the Ush Pizin, a different one of the personalities that personified the midah, embodied the midah of Hashem. Chesed being the week of Pesach, Gevura or Din being the attribute of Yitzchak, being the second week into Yaakov, which is Tiferet, etc. So this is really very time sensitive. We're focusing on this trait of Gevura, this trait of Hashem's strength, his discipline, his judgment, which is a feminine attribute, as we discussed previously. So that is what Eov is coming to tell us. So before we move on, let's just boil it down, is that what we see in the story of Eov and his discussion with Hashem and all the comparisons with the hair is that there exists this midah of judgment, of strictness, that the closer we become to Hashem, the higher the level, the more is expected of us. And it keeps everything balanced. The closer, right, the more accountability. The sweeter, the higher the stakes. And this is how the world is constructed. So what we learn from Eov is that din can appear with chaos, with a dark side, with difficulty, with judgment. And maybe that's why the book of Eov is not well understood, because we know Hashem is kulo tov, kulo kindness, kulo goodness, totally good. And I guess this question of why do bad things happen, I will not attempt to squeeze into our discussion, deserves its own discussion. But that is din when it is applied in a way in our lives that is called Hashem's judgment. Let's move on. Let's go on to the first Nazir that comes to mind, which is Shimshon. Shimshon, the story of Shimshon begins before his birth, before his conception actually, where his mother was alone. She was the wife of Manoach, a tzaddik, and a malach of Hashem appeared to her. and said to her that after many years of childlessness, Hashem is going to bless her with a holy and righteous son. She needs to herself not eat any grapes, drink any wine during the pregnancy, and he shall be born a Nazir. She was so overawed by seeing an angel of Hashem. She went and told her husband. Her husband didn't quite know what to do with what had happened, and he davened to Hashem that he should reveal the Malach to them again, which he did again to the woman. In fact, the name of the mother of Shimshon, of the wife, is Tzelphonis, teach our sages, which means that she turned to this angel, this Tzel of Hashem, or the angel of Hashem turned to her to give her honor for the great woman that she was. Just unbelievable connection to the story of the wife of On ben Peles. If you remember, she was the one who uncovered her hair to save her husband. The mystical sources teach us that the mother of Shimshon was the same soul. She, in fact, was that wife of On ben Peles, and now she's coming back in a different incarnation to be the mother of Shimshon, who's going to have this whole saga play out with hair. Really, really incredible. But Manoach and his wife were from the tribe of Dan. And what's interesting about that is that of the 12 tribes, each one has a different essence. And the essence of the tribe of Dan is what you're thinking, is Din, is that feminine ability to give parameters and contain something, which is the essence of what Din is. For example, going back to the case of Eov, when he endured the difficulties that came upon him, each thing cut him down, narrowed his options, contained him in a negative way even more, and he lost his children, and he lost his money, and he lost his health, and suddenly his whole world shrinks down to just on his bed and each breath that he's taking. So it's constriction in a negative way, but the essence of a woman's ability to have Din is containment in order to birth something new and in a very productive way. So going back to the story of Shimshon, coming from the tribe of Dan, that his mother did what the Malach said, and she gave birth to Shimshon, and he was a Nazir, and he never cut his hair. And what's amazing about his name is that Shimshon comes from the word Shemesh, which is a sun. And the numerical value, the gematria of the word sun, you've got a shin, which is 300, and another shin at the end, which is 300, and a mem, which is 40, which equals 640, which is Din times 10, because Din is, you've got a yud and a nun, which 50 plus 10 is 60, and a dalet is 4, 64. So 64 to the greatest expansion times 10 of that is 640, which is the root of the name Shimshon, Shemesh. So Shimshon from the tribe of Dan, from the tribe of Din, there's a whole theme. So you're also starting to see that it's an archetype. It's not women and men, but there are men that carried this archetype. So that was Shimshon. However, he, as a Nazir, grew his hair, and when he was older, he became the shofet, a very righteous judge of the Jewish people. He was a shofet for 20 years, and his prime mission statement was to contend with the Plishtim, to conquer them, to protect the Jewish people. And the way that he chose to do it was to marry Plishti women. And in that way, he was able to attack and keep them at bay without creating a whole political statement, because he was a son-in-law of all of these Plishti leaders. So what was his supernatural strength that we all remember from learning the story? The first time he went to meet a woman, he encountered a lion, and he ripped that lion open with his bare hands. Another time he was encountering a battle, and he took a jawbone from a donkey, and with that bone he killed 1,000 Plishtim. The greatest strength, actually came at the end of his life, but he was able to he was trapped and captured, and he was able to pick up massive iron gates and walk miles with them. Really like a phenomenon he really was in terms of his strength. Now the story with Shimshon continues that he, towards the end, married a woman, Delilah. And this was the beginning of the end, because Delilah, the name Delilah, comes from the name Delilah, which means of night, of darkness. And this was his whole life, and his whole soul mission was to enter the darkest places and redeem the sparks of light, save the Jewish people. And he was prepared to battle with the darkest forces of evil, which incidentally is what women who also embody this trait of din, of giving parameters for holiness, because we go into dark places, we go into to mundane places, to the physical world, to clothing stores, to food stores. We're cooking, we're interacting with the world, and yet we are redeeming the sparks of light and godliness in it. So that's what he was really trying to do, which is a high stakes game. It's so easy to make a mistake, which he did. But he married Delilah, so she's nighttime, she's Lila, she's darkness, she's the forces of evil. She's also, the name Delilah comes from the word Zal, which means poverty. And she is ultimately what broke the connection to the Infinite One and broke all of the strength and blessing and abundance that came through him with his power of his uncut hair. So let's carry on in the story to see this playing out. Right after they were married, she said to him, because the Plishtim had commissioned her to figure out what the secret of his strength was so that they could defeat him ultimately. And they gave this job to Delilah to find out what the secret of his strength was. And she came to him and she said, "Don't you love me? If you loved me, you would tell me what is the secret of your strength." And he was clever and he didn't reveal it to her. And he told her 1 time, 2 times, 3 times, false stories. No, it's 7 moist branches need to be tied around my hair, or ropes that haven't been ever used need to chain me up, or my hair needs to be put in 7 braids and stuck in a loom, and all these different things he made up. And each time that the Plishtim ambushed him and he was contained in these ways that he had told his wife would make him lose his strength, they just, as soon as he was alerted to danger, they just fell off like threads. So eventually she nagged and she drove him crazy until he was so sick from her constant nagging that he was close to death. It's such an incredible lesson that a woman's power to drive her husband crazy through nagging, he actually was prepared to tell her the secret, even though subconsciously that was giving his life away. He just couldn't handle this bitter treatment from his wife. Quite an astounding message hidden in there. And he told her, "I'll tell you, the secret of my hair is that the secret of my strength is my hair, and it's that I am a Nazir. And if you were to cut my hair, I would lose my strength." And this time she knew that it was the real deal. And she cut his hair, and indeed he lost his strength, but he didn't realize that Hashem had left him. And when the Plishtim came to him this 4th time, he was unable to resist and he was captured. And the first thing that they did was they gouged out his eyes, which was measure for measure, because he had married woman from Plishtim. That was something that he did, it says, because it was right in his eyes, but it actually was taking too far a step to go into the forces of darkness and evil, and that was his downfall. So he lost those eyes, which he relied on instead of relying on Hashem's instructions. The story continues that he's now captured and he's taken to the Plishti place of hostage, and then at a time when they wanted to have some fun and sport with him, he was weakened, lost his strength, now blinded, and they put him, and he asked to hold on to two pillars to lean against, and there was an incredible structure filled to the brim with, socializing men and women. And this is the famous prayer that he says to Hashem, Chazkeni na Hashem, only this time, just this once, strengthen me, give me my strength back. And he knew that he would die in this act, but he crushed the pillars with a final display of strength. And he killed more people in his death than he had in his lifetime. So this story of Shimshon, this Nazir, how does this display what we've been learning together? And really, if you can imagine his hair never combed, never cut, the purity, the kedusha that he had, and how it connected him straight up into Hashem, into the highest spheres, and brought all of that strength and spiritual energy down into him, so that he was an icon, a name of fear among the Philistines. And that is the story of Shimshon. And when his hair was cut, then all of that was lost. Avshalom is very different. Avshalom was also a Nazir. But Avshalom, we will see, was not his hair. There was a gap somewhere. There was a missing link. It was not what it was supposed to be, and it actually became his liability. It was not his asset, but it became a liability, and it was a source of all of his spiritual ills, as well as the cause of his death. So, what was the story with Avshalom? Who was Avshalom? Avshalom, which ironically means the father of peace, he was the son of war. He was the third son of David HaMelech. And David HaMelech, also had an interesting life in that he had many wives. King Shlomo was from Bathsheba. His first child was Amnon, was from Achinoam, I think. Second son from a different woman. His third son was born out of what's called in the Torah the Eshes Yefas Toar. It's the beautiful war captive, woman of war. Her name was Macha, the daughter of Talmai, the king of Gishon. And during battle, he had seen this beautiful woman. He had taken her according to the dictates of the Torah, that for 30 days she doesn't cut her nails, she mourns her father and mother, and she cries, and she agrees to come on board to a Torah way of life, to leave her idolatry behind. And under that prescription, David marries Macha, and they give birth to Avshalom. So Avshalom is the son of a woman who was an Eshet Yefat Toar. Now, the Torah teaches us that a man, yes, he's permitted, he's allowed to, the Torah gives him permission to marry this woman of war under these circumstances. But it's not considered a good thing. And right after the section of the woman of war in the Torah, in the Parshat Ki Teitzei, it goes on to discuss the rebellious son. And Avshalom became exactly that. He became the rebellious son. it says there, the Radak says over there, that Liba lo nachon aladas, that the wife Macha of David, the mother of Avshalom, her heart wasn't fully in it because of the circumstances of her conversion. And the neta, the haneta yotze, demus hashoresh, the branch comes out of the image of its roots. And Avshalom was the son of the daughter of the Talmai king of Gishon. And that's what plays out. So that was coming from the mother's side. From the father's side, he was a son of David HaMelech. David loved him so much. And he had great dreams and aspirations for him. And he, in fact, vowed that he would be a Nazir. So he, too, wasn't allowed to cut his hair, except his Nazirus was a little bit different than Shimshon, is that he was permitted to cut it once a year, just when it got too heavy. However, the Torah tells us that although David was hoping that this would make him very great, there was a blind spot that David didn't have, and that was being that he was a son of a woman of war. And while he was thinking what a holy man this Avshalom is growing up to be, he's a Nazir, Avshalom himself didn't take this in the spirit it was intended, and he used to cut his hair and weigh it to see how heavy it had become, how lustrous, how gorgeous, how much body, how much shine it had. And it started evoking in him a feeling of aesthetic pride, which isn't really appropriate for a man. And it started creating this image of majesty, and this was like the little seeds that was fanned into the flames. I'm mixing metaphors here, excuse me, which he decided that he was going to take over his father's kingdom, and it began this rebellion. So his growing his hair became an over-identification with materialism, with physicality, and it was everything that Naziros was supposed to ward away from. So the story with him goes is that at a point, cutting out a lot of details for the sake of time, but at a point, he had gained so much acclaim from the people who fell for this image of grandeur that he presented, that David HaMelech, again, this was the theme of David's life, was not acknowledged and recognized and received unanimously, and he was actually leaving his palace and running away from Avshalom, who was chasing him. And there was this final battle where the camp of David, what was left of it, and the army of Avshalom engaged. And what happened there is that Avshalom was riding on a mule. Read it. Read you the verse. It's so beautiful to see it inside. Avshalom rochev al hapered. He was riding on the mule through this thick woods. Vayavo hapered tachas shova ha'ela. The mule passed under the branch of a oak tree, Hagadola, big tree. Vayachazak rosho ba'ela, and his hair got stuck in this thick branch. Vayutan bein hashemayim uvein haaretz, and he was dangling between these eternities of heaven and earth. V'hapered asher tachtav avar, and the mule kept on traveling beneath him. So there he was, stranded, hanging by his hair. Rashi says, Vayitin ben Hashemayim ben Haaretz, he was placed between heaven and earth. Amru Rabbu Seini, our sages teach us, Shalav charbo lakot saro. He thought, oh, I could remedy the situation. I will draw my sword and cut my hair. You know, if I have to cut my hair, I have to cut my hair. And he saw Gehenna opening, gaping under him. And he realized in these final seconds of his life, as off as he was, and as evil as he had been, that if he freed himself, he would save himself in the moment, but he would have to deal with Gehenna for eternity. And if he accepted his fate at this point, it was momentary momentary tshuva, instantaneous tshuva. He realized he was wrong. He realized it came from his over-identification with his hair, and he accepted rather to be found and killed by David's army. And that was his form of tshuva. So Rav Tzadok HaKohen goes into this story, and when it describes how beautiful, how capable, if we were all living in the time of Avshalom, we would have thought he was much more qualified for the kingship than King David, because those people were on a very high and great level. But Rav Tzadok says that why did his hair cause such a downfall, whereas the hair of Shimshon was a secret of his strength? And Rav Tzadok says so incredibly that the verse describes how handsome he was, and it says, Mikaf raglo vi'ad kadkado, from the sole of his feet until the tippy top of his head. He had ein bo mum. There was no blemish. There was no flaw. It was pure beauty, pure radiance, pure strength. But implied in this description, from the soles of his feet to the top of his head, there was no blemish. But where was the blemish? Because there obviously was a gap. You don't have a story like Avshalom without a gap. The gap was his root. The gap was his mother, the woman of war. Kabbalistically, what's above the head is called the keter. We discussed it's the place of the tefillin, where they sit on a man. Perhaps the hair covering of a woman itself, wrapped around her, surrounding her head, not part of the head itself. But there was this dichotomy that, yes, his father was David, who was linked straight to Hashem, but then his root, there was a vacant, there was an absence, there was a broken link in the chain, and therefore everything that came after it, and the hair growing on his head, was being nourished from arrogance, from superficiality, from everything that uncontained, uncovered hair has a danger of bringing one to. So that is the story of Avshalom. Quite amazing to see that when it's an unbroken chain from Hashem, the flow of infinite blessing through all of the unfolding of the links of the chain, it is beautiful, links us right back to Hashem. But if there's just one broken link, so then everything that comes from that is missing in goodness and only can bring to downfall. Next, we have Esav. Esav, okay, maybe let's start with Yitzchak. More logical, Esav is the son of Yitzchak, and I mentioned briefly several weeks ago, it feels like years ago, but Yitzchak, vis-a-vis Avraham, embodied this feminine role. He embodied the trait of din, the trait of restraining himself. If you can imagine the Akedas Yitzchak, binding himself on the altar when Hashem told Abraham to sacrifice his son, and he became aware of it. He was afraid of fidgeting, of moving, that the slaughter wouldn't be glatt kosher, that it would be blemished. And he said, tie me, bind me, that akeda, that binding, that containing feeling, that was his essence. And he is the feminine archetype. Yitzchak Avinu is carrying that gift of din. Now, what's amazing is that I'm trying to break stigmas here, is that we all think of din as being not our trait of choice, and yet the name Yitzchak means to laugh. It's joy, self-discipline, self-actualization, self-restraint. All of that brings to the ultimate in joy, and that was Yitzchak. It was din completely connected and is a complete extension of chesed. Take a look at this Sfas Emes. Okay, I am, please God, attaching the sources if you want to read along with me or review it on your own. This is source 5 under hair covering part 4, Bays. The verse says, take a look at Aleph first, from Bereshis. Eile told us Yitzchak ben Avraham. These are the generations, the progeny of Yitzchak, the son of Avraham. Avraham holid es Yitzchak. Avraham gave birth to Yitzchak. What a queer verse. These are the children of Yitzchak. By the way, Avraham gave birth to Yitzchak. We know that, right? We're up to that in the story. That's clear to us. So we have to look at this with deeper eyes. The Sfas Emes plugs in the mystical meaning here, and he says, B'pasuk ve'ele told us Yitzchak ben Avraham. These are the children, the progeny of Yitzchak, the son of Abraham. Abraham gave birth to Yitzchak. To teach us that all of the gevuros, the strict judgments of Hashem, come to us with the power of chesed. As it says, that whoever Hashem loves, that is the one who he rebukes, who he gives his midah of din to. As we said, the righteous are the ones who are judged according to the breadth of a hair. This is what it means when it says Avraham gave birth to Yitzchak, that all the dinim, the hagvuros, mikoach hachesed heim, all strictness, all boundaryness, all definition and parameter and judgment come from the power of chesed. They are born from the power of chesed. And that is what it means. Avraham, chesed, gives birth to Yitzchak. It is a total extension. Everything that is Avraham now becomes chesed, but contained and brought down into the world. However, his son, Esav, so now Yitzchak takes the chesed of Avraham and births it into the world through giving it parameters, just like a woman does from a man. His son takes that concept of din and he disconnects it from its source, and it wreaks havoc and it creates a bad hair day. Okay, if hair represents din, when din is connected to chesed, it is beautiful. When it is disconnected, it becomes wild, chaos, fear, and terror. And that is why when Esav was born, Rashi says, source 4, that the first one, Esav, was born and he was covered with a cloak of hair. Ka'aderes se'ar. That is why they called him Esav. And later on, when he grows up and is given the domain of Rome, and the whole Edomite culture is blessed, it is called the land Artsas Seir, the land of Seir, literally hair. So we can see that hair, in the case of Esav, is din, disconnected from its source, from goodness, from chesed, from Abraham, from Hashem. A woman in a state of disconnect from her husband, the Jewish people in a state of disconnect from God. Finally, let's look at our last source. And our last source is from Shemos. And it is the story of the Jewish people in its most ungraceful moments, unglamorous moments. And we waited 40 days and 40 nights for Moshe to descend from the mountain with the Torah. We miscalculated. He didn't come the day we expected it to. The Erev Rav, the mixed multitude, rose up and they instigated the people and they said, "Where is your leader? He's gone." The Satan showed an image of a dead Moshe in the sky. They panicked. What are we going to do without a leader? They took it into their own hands to create a golden calf. And there's some very strange things in the story, and it's just crazy how it's going to sum everything. This 4 hours we've spent together now, it's going to just sum it up with this Rashi. So what happens here is that 3 verses I want to share with you. One is when they took the jewelry that they collected from the Jewish people, threw it into this fire. Out comes this golden calf through the forces of evil, a live golden calf that they were now going to worship. The Erev Rav says, Eila Elohecha Yisrael, these are your gods, Israel. And it's like, what? What happens? We go from a god to now gods? Yes, this is the journey, the catastrophic journey from Hashem's unity to apparent illusory multiplicity. That is really the root of all idol worship. All error is not seeing Hashem as one, but seeing many forces at play, which is exactly what the Satan is trying to trick us into believing. Moshe comes down and he sees what's going on. He breaks the luchos that he had to give them, and he takes this molten golden calf and he burns it and he grinds it into a powder, and he mixes it with water, and he gives it to the Jewish people to drink. Does this sound familiar? This is, says Rashi, Nischavein lebadkam kasotos. Yes, this is what they did with the name of Hashem. They took the parchment, they ground it into a powder, mixed it with water to create a paste, fed it to the woman under suspect, the Soto woman, and that would bring about her demise. And in this case, the Jewish people were being treated like that Soto woman and are now being given this mixture and this paste. Third verse I want to share with you, I'll read it in the Hebrew, because how can I not? When he comes down and he sees them, and he says, Vayar et ha'am, he sees the nation dancing around this golden calf, and he sees ki paruahu, that this nation has become exposed. Rashi says, what does it mean, exposed? Parua, mugule, revealed, niskale, shimtzo v'klono, all of its despicable dimension, all of its shame and humiliation was exposed at that moment. Kumo, just like the verse, you know this verse, upara es rosh isha, as the Sota woman, after they fed her this paste, they would uncover and expose her hair as a humiliation, saying, you've lost the plot, you've become disconnected, you've fallen for the lie of multiplicity, of illusion. You have forgotten that we are here to be a conduit for Hashem's unity, to receive his Kedusha through the intimate relationship of husband and wife as the microcosm of the Jewish home, which is a reflection of everything the Mishkan was, the Beis HaMikdash was, bringing Hashem's presence into the world. So thank you for exploring with me. This has been a serious study, and I wish that we are all able to apply these truths, to be overwhelmed with the beauty of Torah, the consistency of its spiritual laws and principles, weaving itself through the many situations in Tanakh, and that we have the schus, the merit to see these spiritual reservoirs of holiness weave its way through each and every one of our lives. Thank you.